A few days ago I praised the UK and now this happens. The UK can divert from EU wine rules now because it's no longer a member of the European Union. When the UK was a member of the EU, it was required to follow all EU regulations, including those relating to wine production. However, since the UK left the EU in 2020, it is no longer bound by these rules. And now the UK government has announced that they have plans to scrap a number of EU wine regulations, which it says will boost the UK wine industry. And some of these changes are, for example, allowing winemakers to use a wider range of grape varieties, permitting the production of new wine blends, oh boy, removing the requirement for certain sparkling wines to have foil caps and mushroom stoppers, and allowing the sale of piquette, that is a beverage made from fermented grape skins from seeds and stems. I'm already disgusted. The UK government believes that these changes will give UK winemakers more freedom to innovate and create new products which will ultimately benefit customers. No. Some critics have argued that scrapping EU wine rules will damage the reputation of UK wine, and I agree there. They argue that EU wine regulations are in place to ensure the quality of wine produced in the EU, and that without these regulations, UK wine could be seen as inferior. Yeah, if you rinse the trash, it will. Following a public consultation on wine, the UK government will bring reforms to retained EU law now, and the government has set out reforms for the wine sector, which will begin in 2024 and take advantage of their what they call freedoms outside of the EU. And these reforms are made possible by powers under the Retained EU Law Act, and changes will include removing packaging requirements, such as ending the mandatory requirement for certain sparkling wines that they must have these foil caps and mushroom-shaped stoppers, although they are there for quality. And rules around bottle shapes will also be scrapped, and they say they would free up their producers to use different shapes. The government will also remove the requirement for imported wines to have an importer address on the label. The food business operator, the FBO, responsible for ensuring all legal requirements would still be met with the need to be identified on the label, as is the standard requirement for food products. But you can get a lot of Chinese wine in there. So, further reforms will also give producers more freedom to use hybrid varieties of grapes. And they also want to end the ban on the blending of imported wine, the so-called coupage. And they will allow producers to make a market piquette, as I said. That's a lower alcohol drink produced by rinsing the byproducts of wine production, including grape skins and stalks, with water and then fermenting that rinse. Well, the EU has strict wine rules for several reasons, and one is indeed protecting consumers. The EU wants to ensure that consumers are buying high-quality wine that is accurately labeled. The rules cover everything from the grape varieties that can be used to the methods of production and labeling. And it's also there to protect the producers. The EU also wants to protect the interest of wine producers, because the rules help to ensure that producers are competing on a level playing field and that they are not undercut by producers who are using cheaper, lower quality methods. And of course, it's preserving tradition. Winemaking is a centuries-old tradition in Europe, and the EU wants to preserve this tradition. The rules help to ensure that traditional winemaking methods are still used and that the unique characteristics of European wines are protected. In addition to these reasons, the EU's strict wine rules also have a number of other benefits. And one is promoting sustainability. The rules encourage wine producers to use sustainable methods of production, which is also good for the environment. And they want to support rural economies. The wine industry is an important part of the economy in many rural areas of Europe, and the rules help to support these economies. And they do enhance consumer choice, because the rules help to ensure that consumers have a wide range of high-quality wines to choose from. Overall, the EU's strict wine rules are designed to protect both consumers and producers while also preserving tradition and promoting sustainability. And the rules have a number of benefits, and they are an important part of the EU's common agricultural policy. One of the cornerstones of the EU's wine regulations is the protection of geographical indications, the so-called GIs. GIs are the designations that identify a product as originating from a specific geographical region and possessing qualities or a reputation that are due to that origin. In the context of wine, GIs include protected designations of origin, the PDOs, and protected geographical indications, the PGIs. PDOs are the most stringent form of GI protection, requiring that all stages of production from grape growing to bottling take place within a defined geographical area. This ensures that the unique characteristics of the region, such as soil, climate, and the traditional winemaking practices, are reflected in the final product. PGIs, on the other hand, have slightly less stringent requirements, allowing for some stages of production to occur outside the designated region. However, the product must still possess qualities or a reputation that are essentially attributable to its geographical origin. The EU's wine regulations also establish a classification system for wines primarily based on the origin of the grapes and the methods of production. And the table wine is the most basic category, with no specific requirements regarding grape origin or production methods. That's what you usually can buy in boxes here. And wine with geographical indication are produced within a defined geographical area, either under a PDO or PGI designation. And there's a quality wine produced in a specific region, that's QWPSR. Wines produced in a specific region with stricter production requirements than GI wines, ensuring a higher level of quality. And there's the wine with a protected designation of origin, that's the PDO. That's the highest level of classification, reserved for wines produced entirely within a defined geographical area and adhering to strict production rules, guaranteeing the unique characteristics and reputation of the region. The EU's wine regulations also govern the methods of wine production, covering aspects such as grape varieties, vineyard practices, and winemaking techniques. These rules aim to ensure the quality and authenticity of European wines while preserving traditional practices and promoting sustainable viticulture. For instance, there are restrictions on the use of certain additives and techniques, such as chaptalization, that means adding sugar to increase alcohol content, and acidification, which means adjusting acidity levels. Additionally, there are specific requirements for labeling and packaging, ensuring that consumers have clear and accurate information about the origin, but also the quality and characteristics of the wine they purchase. The EU's wine regulations are enforced by national authorities in each member state with oversight from the European Commission. Regular inspections and audits are conducted to ensure compliance with the rules, and non-compliant producers may face penalties or even lose their right to use GI designations. The strict enforcement of these regulations help to maintain the high standards of European wines, protecting both consumers and producers, while preserving the rich heritage and tradition of winemaking in Europe. The UK can still export wine to the EU even if it diverges from EU wine standards. However, there are some restrictions on what types of wine can be exported and how they must be labeled, and if you even can call that wine what they are planning. Wine that is produced in the UK and meets EU standards can be exported to the EU without any restrictions. And this includes wine that is produced under a protected designation of origin or protected geographical indication I explained earlier. Wine that is produced in the UK but does not meet EU standards can still be exported to the EU, but it must be labeled as non-EU wine. And this means that the wine cannot be labeled with a PDO or PGI, And it must meet certain labeling requirements still, such as stating the country of origin and the grape varieties used. As I said, the UK government is now currently working on a new set of wine standards that will apply to wine produced in the UK, if you can still call that wine. And these standards are likely to be less strict than EU standards. Not likely, they're definitely, but they will still need to meet certain requirements in order to be exported to the EU. It's important to note that the EU is a major market for UK wine, so it is in the UK's interest to maintain a good relationship with the EU and to ensure that its wine meets EU standards. However, the UK government is also keen to promote innovation and experimentation in the UK wine industry, so it's likely that this diversion from EU standards will now really happen. There are no other European countries that currently diverge from EU wine standards and sell it to the EU. All EU member states, of course, are required to comply with the EU's Common Agricultural Policy, which includes a set of regulations governing wine production and labeling. And these regulations, as I said several times, are designed to protect consumers and producers while also preserving tradition and promoting sustainability. The UK is the only European country that will now diverge from EU wine standards as a former member because it's not a member anymore. The UK government will have some stuff produced that will only be drank in the UK in the end, I guess. Some critics have rightfully argued that scrapping EU wine rules will damage the reputation of UK wine in this case. There are some non-European countries with wine standards that are lower than the EU wine standards, of course. And this is because the EU has some of the strictest wine regulations in the world, and non-EU countries are not bound by these regulations. But that limits them exporting them to the UK. For example, some non-EU countries allow the use of additives and techniques that are not permitted in the EU, such as this chaptalization and the acidification I mentioned earlier. Additionally, some non-EU countries have less stringent requirements for labeling and packaging, which means that consumers may not have as much information about the origin, quality, and characteristics of the wine they are purchasing. However, it is absolutely important to note that not all non-EU European countries have lower wine standards than the EU. Some non-EU countries have their own strict wine regulations that are comparable or indeed even exceed EU standards. For example, Switzerland has a very strict system of wine appellations which are similar to the EU's protected designations of origin, the PDOs. Ultimately, the quality of wine produced in a particular country depends, of course, on a variety of factors, including the grape varieties grown, the climate, the winemaking techniques, and the regulations in place. While the EU wine standards are generally very high, there are also many excellent wines produced in non-EU countries, but if they want to export them to the EU under the normal conditions, they have at least to meet EU standards. So a lot of wines that you can buy in certain countries domestically, and that will be the case with the UK after they made those changes, are far away from the high quality standards in the EU. And if you want to call this a Brexit benefit, it's up to you. But from 2024, when they start producing those rinse water, what they call wine, I don't call wine stuff, I will definitely no longer buy British wine, or I will have a very close look. Well, that's a lot of work involved then, just to buy British wines that voluntarily stick to EU rules. And there will be, the good ones will stick to the EU rules because they want to export to the EU and they want to bring high quality wine, because the changes that are coming now will open space for a lot bad quality stuff. And if you want to see something else right now, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.